I think stylistically it is probably the most exciting fight of the year. And I think if Ilia wins this fight, he has gone on probably the best 3-fight streak in UFC history.
Welcome to the Fighter Forecast.
Episode 33. Today we got a special one for you. UFC 317 is right around the corner this weekend. Charles Oliveira versus Ilia Topuria. Headliner. Huge fight. Huge implications. Tons to talk about. We got a little bit of news to discuss before that, as last night's fight card headlined by Jamahal Hill versus Khalil Rountree Jr. finished up with Khalil winning a dominant decision. So before we get into the 317 action, Drew, how are you doing? What did you think of the fight last night? Give me your quick breakdown and what you think should be going on next for both fighters before we get into 317.
Yeah, I mean, I'm doing pretty good. In regards to the fight itself, I think the biggest indicator of how this fight was going to go was the first 10 seconds when it seemed like Jamahal Hill kind of approached Khalil Rountree, and Khalil Rountree just still had his back against the wall, and he had his hands down. At no point did it really seem like there was a massive threat towards Khalil Rountree in that fight, and that obviously showed with the result, with Khalil Rountree, I believe, landing three knockdowns against
and like two of them were in round 3, I think.
Yeah, and then I believe outstriking him 90 to 60 on significant strikes. But the funniest part of me was Jamahal Hill acting surprised when it was 50-45 at the end of the fight.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, just very dominant performance, and it really just shows how good of a fighter, or how good you improve as a fighter after fighting such a phenom like Alex Pereira. We were talking about the same thing with Joaquin Buckley and Kamaru Usman. Like, I really want to see how Joaquin Buckley does in the future after fighting a guy like Kamaru Usman. But yeah, I mean, the striking was just very good, and I think Khalil Rountree learned a lot from his fight against Pereira, where he kind of got excited and threw a lot near the start, and thinking he could get that knockout, which when you're going against a guy like Alex Pereira, that's kind of something you need to do. Yeah, the longer you stay in that fight, the harder it becomes for you to keep up with him. But kind of just, I don't necessarily feel bad for Jamahal Hill, but it's kind of sad to see the decline that he's had since becoming champion. I mean, losing to Alex Pereira by arguably the fight that looked like the easiest to Alex Pereira in his recent fights, and then going against Yuri Prochazka, who Alex Pereira knocked out twice very easily, and losing to him by TKO, and then getting 50-45 to the guy that Alex Pereira demolished, essentially. I guess it's just very debilitating to Jamahal Hill's confidence, I would say, going forward, especially if he's still eyeing a championship in the future.
Yeah. The biggest thing I took from that fight is Khalil Rountree gives me major Batman vibes. Like, I think we knew this, but like you said, just like the walk, I mean, I feel like from that moment you just knew something crazy was about to happen. And then, I mean, it was insane watching that fight, because it would be like Jamahal Hill would throw a leg kick, and it would be obviously like a very trying to close the distance and kind of move around a little bit, and then Khalil would throw him back, and it would be like his whole body would go into it, and Jamahal would I just
leg kicks.
Yes. Oh my God.
It looked like a soccer kick.
Dude, it was. He puts his whole body, and then he jumping karate chops him. It's crazy.
The jumping hammer fist.
Yeah.
To start the fight, and then he was doing the Gaethje leg kicks where you just run forward and just full shin.
Yeah.
No consideration for snapping your own leg.
No. So that's why I say this guy's Batman. He has no mercy. The only thing stopping him is his moral code. I think the leg kicks really did change the fight, honestly. That's my biggest takeaway from this fight is, he was landing that gigantic overhand over and over again. That's what kept dropping him, was that crazy overhand. But it was super clear that Jamahal already fights pretty flat-footed. He has really good boxing, but his movement is pretty flat-footed. That doesn't mean that he's a slow fighter or anything. It's just kind of the way that he moves around the octagon. So clearly it was in the strategy of Khalil to just chop those legs down, and my goodness, he did. I have not seen leg kicks like that in a long time. But yeah, super, super impressive performance by Khalil there. He really did. There was never a point in that fight where I thought it was really even all that close. I thought it was a little bit confusing at the end of the fight, even after the decision was read, that Jamahal Hill was kind of asking Khalil, why did you not really engage me? Why? I was kind of confused, because I mean, you said it, Khalil knocked him down 3 times. Like it wasn't really all that close of a fight. So like what reason would Khalil have to? That's why I was kind of confused, but all respect to Jamahal Hill. It definitely puts him in a pretty weird spot because he is definitely still up there in this division, but he's lost a few to the point where the UFC kind of would start maybe matching up against an up-and-comer. You know what I mean? Kind of like honestly given the Usman treatment, and obviously he was not quite the champion that Usman was, but you lose enough, you kind of get given the next up-and-coming guy. So I wouldn't mind maybe a Dominic Reyes, guy who's obviously not really an up-and-comer. He's been there, but he's been on a little streak. They're close enough in the rankings where I feel like it's not an insane jump for either guy. And then Khalil Rountree, I mean, he's gonna pop up into the top 5s. Like you said, the Magomed Alex fight's got to happen probably. I wouldn't mind seeing a Khalil Yuri. Wow. That fight gets me excited just saying it. Like that would be insane. That would be a crazy fight. Like just stylistically, those guys going back and forth, their conversations would be insane. But I don't know. A lot of implications from that fight. I think it was a pretty fun fight. I think the UFC, a lot of it was overshadowed by our last conversation, which was obviously the Jon Jones retirement news. But yeah, that was a fine night. Some other big results, but that's kind of all we're going to talk about because obviously the point of this episode is UFC 317. Drew, I'll throw it over to you because when we brought the show back, we were kind of bringing up fights that we were most excited about leading into this year, and I think this was the one that you picked was UFC 317, if I'm not mistaken, headlined obviously by the 2 fighters you're about to talk to about in a second. Tell me, let's start from the main event here. What are your initial thoughts on Ilia Topuria and Charles Oliveira? And just give me a breakdown. I
think when you're dealing with a guy like Ilia Topuria, I think the general way that Ilia Topuria has been perceived, at least in his last 5-6 fights, is inevitable, right? He's the first guy to knock down Max Holloway. Honestly, I think it should be Gaethje. I think that knockdown should have counted. And now that it's officially...
Well, first time to knock him out, though. I mean, he put
first time
Max
to knock him out. Max Holloway, a guy that I would argue has the best chin in the UFC, essentially sent him to the lightweight division with him.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Ilia Topuria has always kind of been considered this inevitable force. And you see it now with Charles Oliveira, this guy that has been massively respected within the lightweight division, a guy that has the most submission victories within the UFC, a guy that had a really good title run prior to facing a guy like Islam Makhachev, who is one of the best guys pound for pound, or arguably number 1 pound for pound guy in the UFC now that Jon Jones seems to be out of the picture. But even still, I mean, very impressive performances. I mean, you still have people arguing they should have beat Arman Tsarukyan. That fight was, I'm going to necessarily say controversial. It was definitely close. Turns around, beats a guy like Michael Chandler pretty decisively. And then he turns around and he has another opportunity. So it's almost the storyline I'm kind of getting from this fight is inevitability versus redemption. You have a guy that, like Charles, who has been there before, has been on both sides of the coin as this guy who has been viewed as a quitter, who couldn't seem to make it to this guy that was at the top of the world. And now he's kind of in this limbo within division. And now with Islam, the only guy to really, really challenge him in the division, moving out of the way, he has an opportunity to come back to the top. But right as Islam's coming out, in comes Ilia Topuria, this inevitable force that has been destroying legends left and right at the 145 division. And now he's coming up to 155, and he's saying that he's going to blow someone's chin off the second he touches him, that he feels so much stronger that he even said he doesn't want to hurt Charles Oliveira. He wants to submit Charles in the nicest way possible, so that he can't, because he likes Charles that much, apparently. Like, Ilia treats it as if this is just a walk in the park for him. Like he knows he's going to win.
I think the only thing that slightly sours this fight in the eyes of the fans is the fact that we did miss out on that Islam Ilia fight, right? I think in any other world this is, and I think it still is, just such a massive fight for this division and a great fight for both guys. But I just think the fact that we're not getting Islam Ilia, and honestly in a year that has been marred by fights not getting made, it seems like it's just been a really, we don't need to get more into the Jon Jones, Tom Aspinall stuff, but obviously that one too. There's just a lot been going on, so it would have been really nice to see Islam versus Topuria. But I mean, this fight is just as good, arguably. Like, if you're taking out the if you're just looking at pure style versus style, if we really do see the Charles Oliveira that we saw versus even Armin, or Gaethje or Poirier, any of those guys, this could be a really exciting fight. Ilia is undefeated. His last 2 fights were knocking out, like you said, legends, Alexander Volkanovski and Max Holloway. Ilia is, I'm seeing odds all over the place, but I'm seeing places where he's as high as a minus 500 favorite against Charles. So there's a lot riding on Ilia's victory here. And I think a lot of people are counting out a champion in Charles Oliveira, who has beat amazing guys before and has done it impressively. He finishes everybody, and he can knock you out. He can submit you. He can do anything. So I think stylistically, this is such an amazing fight, and I truly can't wait for it. I think stylistically, it is probably the most exciting fight of the year. And I think if Ilia wins this fight, he has gone on probably the best 3-fight streak in UFC history. You know what I mean? I don't think that there's much to argue with there. So, with all that in mind, I think I will give my prediction for this one here, and then I will hand it over to you. This one's really hard for me because when I see a guy like Charles Oliveira as such a big underdog, it's really hard for me not to pick him. You know what I mean? But I'm a boxing fan, so it's really hard not to just love watching a guy like Ilia Topuria work, because he is just so fluid and so slick. And the amount that we see Charles Oliveira get dropped and touched is, that's how he made his second run in the UFC, was getting dropped by guys and then just coming back and winning, right? Like Islam dropped. Obviously that's not a good option because Islam dropped him, Michael Chandler dropped him, Gaethje dropped him, Poirier dropped him, and he had won every one of those fights except for Islam. I just think the problem comes when you get knocked down by a guy like Ilia Topuria, because I don't think that when you get knocked down by a guy like Ilia, you get back up. I think we've seen that enough times, and I think the power is going to be different at 155. I don't even know how I can say different because it was so insane before, but he is a big, stocky guy. I think his grappling is good enough to kind of halt the advances of Charles and engage if he needs to. But I think that this fight is going to be one on the feet. So I'm going to say Ilia Topuria by round 2 knockouts, my prediction.
I like it. I like it a lot.
What do you think?
I'm going to piggyback off what you said. Just did make kind of a career off of winning fights when he getting knocked down. It's funny, there's a trend on Instagram where you get it started with Nick Diaz, where Nick Diaz would get knocked down, and then they would just cut to the end of the fight where he's celebrating because he choked the dude out with the triangle or whatever it has to be. Same thing with Charles. Charles would get clipped by Michael Chandler somehow, some way, wins it. And I think but going off what you said, I think the issue here is that if he can get clipped by Michael Chandler, a guy with the most obvious hooks in the UFC, a guy that got picked apart essentially from a striking standpoint by Dustin Poirier. Not to say that Dustin Poirier isn't a good striker, he obviously is, but if he can get caught that way, if he can get caught by Islam Makhachev, a guy that we haven't really considered a striker, arguably, he does have good striking. Obviously, grappling is his main stylistic advantage in most fights. If he can get caught like that, I think it's going to be very easy for Ilia to find openings, and I think even if he does get clipped and he's somehow still conscious, I don't think his grappling works as good against a guy like Ilia Topuria, especially because a lot of Charles's grappling is predominantly against guys that aren't good grapplers. If you look at Justin Gaethje, if you look at Dustin Poirier, black belt jiu-jitsu. He's a good grappler, but he's not primarily a grappler. Michael Chandler, wrestler, but not primarily a grappler within the MMA standpoint. When he goes against guys that are proficient in grappling, like Ilia Topuria, and I guess the people are forgetting that good of a grappler Ilia Topuria is, because he hasn't really had to get a submission win aside from his submission win over Bryce Mitchell, but I think that's the issue. But yeah, to continue what you said, I think Ilia's just going to be really crisp if it's standing. It's different from a guy like Islam, where if you're very offensive, that you're always waiting for that shoot. Charles doesn't really work that way. He's not very offensive in his grappling. If he gets against the cage, then he starts trying to put hooks in. That's more so where he's at advantage, but he doesn't really implement that grappling when you're putting the pressure on him, and especially when you're going against a guy like Ilia Topuria, who has created his knockout style from putting people into pressure, backing them into corners, and then getting looping combinations to just completely disorient them. And when you put all that together, I just find a really difficult way to look at this fight and think of a way Charles Oliveira wins. Could Charles somehow get a flying triangle or an armbar from guard or something like that, yes, but I mean, it's always possible, but looking at his previous performances, I just think there's too much of a disparity. And if Ilia performs the way that he's describing and the way that we have seen him at 145, I can only imagine just how devastating he is at 155. So I will agree with you. I will also take Ilia Topuria by second round knockout.
Look at us go, man. That is 1 for 1. Let's keep this trend going. Let's hope.
Hopefully I break my curse today. All right. I mean, if
oh, yeah.
Because I think I'm on like a 10 event streak of getting the main event.
But it seems like it's funny because you picked right when we didn't break it down because you picked the Khalil. But it seems like when you break it down, it goes wrong. So this has got to be the one, right? This next one is also an amazing fight. This is a fight I've been waiting for a long time. This was one of the, like you said when this fight was announced, when we were predicting our champions in each division in 2025, or I think, yeah, it was 2025, right? One of the guys fighting here was who I predicted as champion. The fight is the flyweight division title fight, Alexandre Pantoja versus Kaikar France. I chose Kaikar France as my champion for 2025, and it seemed like it was not going to even get a chance to happen, but flyweight division, Pantoja is running out of contenders quickly. He's on his 4th consecutive title defense, which is insane, considering Figueiredo and Moreno fought, was it 4 times or at least 3 times in a row? It was insane. But yeah, this is an amazing fight. It has a lot of storylines in it because these two fought in the season of Tough where basically the flyweight division was revived. It was the winner got to fight Demetrius Johnson in a title fight. And the winner was Tim Elliott, I believe, which is strange thinking back to that now. But great fight. Pantoja versus France. Pantoja is minus 260 favorite, coming back with Kaikar around a 210 underdog. So really good fight here. Both guys have done insane things in this division. I mean, they're both veterans of the sport. Obviously, Kaikar France known for his amazing power and striking coming out of that City Kickboxing gym, but Pantoja's a dog, dude. Like, he's a zombie. He's a dominant champ. He's on a 7-fight win streak. He seems to be able to come back from anything, but Kaikar France is coming off of that big KO of Steve Erceg, which really shocked me. Number 4 in the division. I'm gonna make my prediction here. Or sorry, let me hear, since I made my prediction first last time, let me hear what you think of the fight and then give me your prediction and then I'll finish off there.
Sounds good. It's a weird situation because you have a guy like Alexandre Pantoja who is
very good.
You have a guy like Alexandre Pantoja who has quietly become one of the really good flyweights that we've seen in recent history. I mean, like you said, Brandon Moreno and Davison Figueiredo kind of just passed the belt around for 2 years until Figueiredo ended up moving up, and then Alexandre Pantoja kind of just popped up out of nowhere, and he had a very close fight with Brandon Moreno, and ever since then he's kind of just been a level above everybody else. His last fight was kind of a blowout. I mean, people were, I think even myself, were kind of hoping that the one champion would come in and kind of shock the world in the sense. Yeah. But that obviously didn't end up happening, and now you have one of the last guys, Alexandre Pantoja. I mean, not one of the last guys, but up in that has been a very obvious contender, like one of the last serious contenders that Alexandre Pantoja has yet to face as a champion, that is. And it's tough because you have a situation where you've had a guy as active as Pantoja has been going against a guy like Kaikar France who has been limited in his fights, I think. But even still, I think his fights have been very impressive prior. I think most people would agree that his fight against Amir Abazi was a win towards Kaikar France. I mean, that ended up being a bit controversial. In my opinion, I think Kaikar France won that fight. His knockout win against Steve Erceg was very impressive, and I think that's the biggest indicator that he could pose a threat, because I think if you look back at Alexandre Pantoja's fight against Steve Erceg, if Steve Erceg had not tried to grapple in the 5th round and tried to stay on the feet, I think some people would argue that he would have won. But I think that's where it becomes an issue. I think Kaikar France has more experience. I think he's very well versed. I think he has very great striking that could pose a threat to Pantoja. I think the path to victory here for Kaikar France is withstanding the initial pressure. And I've said this before, I think Pantoja's biggest weakness is his cardio. I think the longer that he stays in the fight, the worse his striking defense becomes. I think if Kaikar France can cruise to the 3rd, 4th round and then really put pressure on him, I think you can get a TKO there. But at the same time, you have a guy like Pantoja who has really great grappling as well, and that really poses a threat. My heart's telling me Kai France, but my brain's telling me Alejandro Pantoja. I think Pantoja has kind of been above the rest of the division for a while. I think he's kind of refined himself, and I think he kind of outdoes everything Kai France does for the vast majority of things. I think if anyone can do it, it's probably Kai France. I think he poses the most striking threat to Alejandro Pantoja out of anybody within the division. But I think where Kai France stands out in striking, he lacks in other aspects of fighting. I think Brandon Moreno would be the biggest guy when it comes to wrestling and grappling. I think Royval is the best guy when it comes to just straight out cardio. Urseg is kind of a watered down version of Kai France, in my personal opinion. But yeah, I think Alejandro Pantoja kind of just has a good mixture of everything. And that's what makes him such a dominant fighter within the division currently. So if I had to guess, I'd probably say Alejandro Pantoja by decision.
Well, I think it's hard to argue with anything you're saying, but got to go with my prediction earlier in the show. Got to go with my boy. I've been a fan of Kai's. That's one of the tough seasons I actually did watch. So I've always been a fan of that guy. So I'm going to say Kai France by decision. I think it'll probably go to a decision just because both these guys are really hard to put out. And I think in my head, the path to victory for Kai France is kind of weathering that storm. And I think you just really have to damage Pantoja over and over again. And I think you have to do it to a point where, like, we've seen it. We've seen him get beat by Figueiredo early in his career, all these kind of things. We've seen it. He is not invincible, although he seems like it. So I really do think that Kai France can get it done here. So I'm going to pick the New Zealander by decision.
Hey, man, I hope it happens.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, for the sake of picking.
Gotta go with the...
Definitely a tough pick.
Yeah, gotta do it.
I think the thing people don't look at the most is Pantoja's leg kicks.
Mm-hmm.
Those things are nasty, and I think that's really what helps him open up fighters so much. But yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be a really good fight.
Dude, I've never seen pressure like Pantoja's pressure. Like the way he just runs at people, it's like, it's got to be so tiring just backing up the whole time. But anyways, next up, this is an exciting one. This is definitely a different one from the ones that we've seen as far as kind of stakes here. But the featured bout here is Beneil Dariush versus Renato Moicano, the number 9 versus the number 10. Two guys who have been in this division for a long time. Dariush is coming in as the underdog with Moicano coming off of that title loss to Islam Makhachev on short notice. But Drew, what are your thoughts on this fight? I'm really excited about this one. It's not as obviously stakes driven as probably pretty much every other fight on this card, but especially the main and co-main event. But I think it could be a kind of an underrated scrap here. I mean, both these guys are kind of coming towards the end of their career, so they've kind of got a lot to lose. You know,
you kind of nailed it right there. Both these guys are kind of in lightweight limbo. I think Beneil Dariush, ever since that fight against Charles Oliveira, has kind of fallen off a cliff in a sense that he went from being this serious lightweight contender to kind of just there, I guess. And I guess it's also the way in which he has lost those fights. Not TKO from Charles Oliveira, almost essentially a flying knee from Arman Saryukin. And then ever since there, kind of been floating around. He's almost like a Tibura of the lightweight division, I would say. And then you have a guy like Renato Moicano, who somehow, some way had a championship fight.
Money Moicano, baby.
Like the one person you would not look at, and this isn't a dig at Renato Moicano, it's just that, like, it seemed like one of those, like, you know, remember when you would play the UFC video games and you would play long enough that it would just loop through fighters that like should have retired like 10 fights ago in the game, and it's like how the heck is Bobby Green the champion? He's fighting he's fighting Conor McGregor, and they both like have 34 wins in the UFC. Like that's kind of what I was imagining that fight in. But yeah, I mean, he's also kind of in limbo ever since then. He was calling out Paddy the Baddy, but after Paddy's dominant win over Michael Chandler, he started to respect him more. So, and Renato has said that he does not want to fight anyone that's good. He just wants easy money, which, I mean, I can respect that.
I love Moicano, dude. He's so funny.
Renato's he reminds me of like a lightweight Kevin Holland in a way. Like they have their similar aspects, but again, a very interesting fight. I mean, I think, and both these guys are have jiu-jitsu backgrounds. I think that's going to be kind of an important factor. I think, but their striking has been good as well. I think, but yeah, I mean, the odds say it themselves. It's a bit of a toss-up. But if I'm going into this, I think Renato might be a little bit more hungry for the fight. I think Beneil is kind of entering the final stages of his career. I mean, if this isn't his final fight, I think the next one would be, assuming he loses. I just don't really see an exact area where Beneil can move forward in the division within his upcoming fights. I think it'll probably go to decision. I don't really see a finish here. I mean, maybe if Renato clips Beneil in some way. I mean, you can make the argument that Beneil Dariush's chin has kind of lost any respect that it did have. But yeah, I'll say Renato Moicano by decision. I think he's got a bit of an edge. I think he's hungrier, and I think his performances have shown that he's able to at least compete with the people that he's facing against. It seems that in Beneil's recent fights that he's just doesn't seem like he's on the same level as the guys that he's been facing.
Yeah. No, it's definitely an interesting one. I'm kind of going back and forth in my head a lot. I think I was originally going to pick Beneil because, I mean, you talked about it, but there really was a point before that Oliveira fight that he was kind of the boogeyman in the division. You know what I mean? Like, he beat Gamrot at the point and where Gamrot was like on a rocket ship and it was like a beatdown. So I originally was going to pick Beneil, but I just think that, you know, the layoff is not going to help him. He's getting to a point in his career where you're right, like he's a much hard, I mean, for both of these guys, but you know, Renato got to that title shot. So I think maybe he understands the point in his career. And as he says, give me the money. You know what I mean? He's not here for a long time. This fight was supposed to happen earlier this year, which I kind of completely forgotten about. But then obviously, Renato got called up for that title shot. So I think it'll be very interesting. Both of these guys are very similar in experience levels, both close to 30 fights, very close in height, a lot of similarities, you know, like you talked about it, but stylistically, they're both grappling heavy, rangy strikers. I think Moicano definitely has the crisper striking, and I think he uses his range a little bit better. So I think in terms of having a clear advantage in any one area, I think I would give Moicano the striking. I think from what I've seen, it's definitely close, but I would say maybe Beneil's scrambles are a little bit cleaner as far as grappling. So I think that those guys might kind of cancel each other out. But I can't doubt Moicano. I mean, do you remember the Jalen Turner fight? The way that, I mean, he almost killed Moicano, it seemed like. And then Moicano got up and won that fight somehow. So I think it's really hard to doubt Moicano at this point in his career. And I think, you know, he doesn't have all that much to lose, but I think he's got a lot to win in terms of, you know, he's got a podcast now. He's kind of a social media star. So, you know, you got to keep your brand up. So I'm going to say Moicano. I think he's going to clip him. I think you're right about that. I think he's going to clip him with like a long straight shot. Maybe I'll say round 2. So I'm going to say Moicano TKO round 2. I think it's going to be a fun one.
I like it. I like it a lot. It's very interesting to see where he goes because, I mean, I guess the issue is that regardless of who wins, still kind of just that limbo situation. Yeah. I was honestly surprised to find out they're the same age.
I know.
He just feels like a grandpa.
Well, he just looks like This is respectfully, of course. He's had gray hair since he was like 20.
Actually, I think it's the gray hair that does it. I think in my head, but yeah, I mean, it's just a weird situation. I think it'll be a good fight, but still a lot of questions going forward, regardless of who wins. This next fight, not necessarily the case. You got Joshua Van versus Brandon Royval. A big fight, I think, especially when you have a guy like Joshua Van coming in on after fighting
2 weeks ago.
I think he's already got 3 fights on this year. I think he said he wants to try and fight 6 times. Don't know the exact logistics for that, but
well, especially if you win this one, I don't know if you're going to fight.
Yeah, I mean, I think if Joshua Van wins here, he makes a very good case to fight for the title next. But I mean, let's just look at what he's done so far. I mean, he entered the UFC in 2023. Since then, he's fought 2, 3, 4, 8 times, won 7 of those fights. Impressive fights overall. I mean, fought Soraya, Cody Durden, Bruno Silva, his only loss being at TKO to Charles Johnson. Overall, I mean, he's been very impressive in his recent fights. I think he's been kind of a guy that's, I wouldn't say he's necessarily been under the radar. I know that every time he shows up, I kind of like that name just pops out to me and I'm like, oh, okay, that's probably going to be a pretty good fight. I think most flyweight fights in general are pretty entertaining for the most part, but he's going up against a guy in Brandon Royval who's been very impressive, but kind of just been in a weird situation within the division. I think but he's been on a good run. I mean, he went against Tatsuro Taira a guy that everyone was kind of looking at as this new face of the division. I'm pretty sure Tyra entered as like a massive favorite for the fight as well, and going to a split decision win for Royval, another split decision win against Brandon Moreno. Both of these fights coming after his loss to Alejandro Pantoja, but yeah, I mean it's a big question for this fight. I think the only thing that really stands out to me is there's a massive height and reach difference. Joshua Van 5'5", Brandon Royval 5'9". But yeah, I guess I want to know what your pick is first. I think and Alejandro Pantoja is getting to this weird period where he's kind of just going to be cycling through fighters, and he keeps assuming he would win against Kai Kara-France, which you don't think he will. Who you got going forward?
Dude, I'm so excited about this fight. Joshua Van is I think he's one of the most exciting prospects in the UFC right now. I mean, oh my gosh, I remember especially that last fight, man, against Bruno Silva. His striking looked so clean. And then to come back 2 weeks later against the number one contender in Brandon Royval, who has been fighting the top guys in this division since he came into the UFC. You know, he fought Brandon Moreno in 2020, which is when so in 2020, his first year in the UFC, he fought, and now a lot of this is because the flyweight division at that point especially was not quite as developed, but he fought Tim Elliott, who I don't think he's in the UFC anymore, but he was one of the top guys for a while. Then he fought and beat Kai Kara-France. Then he lost to Brandon Moreno, and that was an injury loss. I do remember that fight. So, you know, this guy's been fighting the best in the division since he got into the UFC. Joshua Van, a super exciting prospect with, honestly, a lot to win, but not a lot to lose here. You know, if you lose, you gain experience against a guy like Brandon Royval. If you win, you are the number one contender. And like you said, probably getting a title shot because there's not that much left in this division. I think if Kai Kara-France wins and they don't give Pantoja the title shot, I think Royval could get a shot against Kai Kara-France, you know, because that's kind of an exciting new matchup. But I think Van just has so much to gain here. It's really hard to doubt Royval. He's done so much in this division and beat so many great guys. And, you know, you pointed out all the physical logistics there. He has the reach advantage, the height advantage, even the leg reach advantage. But, you know, there's something to having momentum in the fight game. You know what I mean? Like, clearly you're taking a fight on 2 weeks' notice. There's something to that, I think. And I love this kid's energy. I think he is great for this division, and I just think it's going to be a really exciting fight. I think it's going to go to a decision. I think both these guys are so tough. Royval is kind of the Nate Diaz of this division, right? He fights super lanky. He's tall. He gets dropped, but he comes back. I think Joshua Van is the Ilia Topuria of this division, and I think these two guys are going to meet, and it's going to be kind of hard for Royval to keep up with the striking. I think it's going to be really interesting if Royval can kind of wrap him up and get him to the ground, because that's definitely where he has an advantage. And like you said, the length could be a big issue there, but I think this is kind of, and that seems like it's been the case with a lot of the fights I'm picking tonight, which is probably not very good as far as a podcaster, but I got to go with my gut here, man. I'm going to say Joshua Van by decision.
I think Brandon Royval definitely has the grappling advantage here. I do think Joshua Van is a little bit different, though. I think he does pose a much bigger threat, at least when it comes to striking and that finishing power that he kind of brings with him. I'm going to have to agree and lean towards Van. Probably by decision. I think Royval has too much experience to really get knocked out. Not to say that he couldn't, but I think he will be able to kind of combat that striking. He's gone against very good strikers before, and I don't necessarily see him getting knocked out, at least in the way that Van did in his last fight. I think Van will be able, and we have to remember it is a 3-round fight. I think if this was a 5-round fight, it would pose bigger issues as cardio would become more and more of a factor. We have to take into account this is a 3-round fight. I think if Van can do the same thing Alejandro Pantoja did with Royval and have a lot of initial pressure and kind of put Royval on his back foot at the start of the fight, I do think that will help him the most. And yeah, I think the striking differential will be massive for Royval. Not to say that, I mean, not for Van, not to say that Royval does not have striking, but I think if you can put a guy like Royval on his back foot and get him on the defensive, it becomes a lot easier to take the control of the fight. And I think Van can definitely do that. I think he definitely has the upper hand in the fact that he's not necessarily got more experience, but he's got more momentum going forward. That's probably where I'm going to put my pick. So yeah, I agree. Van by decision.
All right. I think we have agreed on everything so far except for the method in the last fight, right?
No, we disagreed on
yes, the Kai France fight. Yes,
okay. Yeah, but everything else, yes.
Yeah. Well, here's the last one. So let's see if we agree on this one. An interesting fight here. Payton Talbott versus Felipe Lima. Obviously, we know who Payton Talbott is. A huge up-and-coming contender, big social media presence, won a first couple fights, blistering KO. I mean, really was poised to be a star. You know what I mean? Like clearly was put in that position. And then he ran into Raoni Barcelos, who has gone on quite the run recently. That's not a guy to be taken lightly. Obviously, he just beat Cody Garbrandt, but that fight really did show a hole in Payton's grappling game. Right? It was a hard one to watch if you were a fan of that guy. Getting pretty much dominated from pillar to post there, and now he steps in short notice against Felipe Lima, who is on a little bit of momentum here. He's I think he's 14-1. I think he made his UFC debut in 2024 as a replacement, but he got a win there. Really impressive fighter. This is not an easy fight for Payton to step in on short notice. Payton is a underdog here. It's kind of interesting. You go from being a minus like 1,000 favorite in his last fight or something like that to a plus 165 in your next fight against an arguably worse opponent. You know, it's really interesting. So I think this fight will say a lot about Payton Talbott. I am not going to lie. I can't say that I remember watching Felipe Lima's fights, but doing a little bit of research here, he definitely is a well-rounded guy. He's got some good experience. I think that the easy pick is going to be Felipe Lima by decision, right? That's where the money seems to be pointing to. But I think there's something in the water. I do believe in the Payton Talbott hype. I think the striking is the real deal. I know he probably hasn't had as much time as a lot of people would want to work on the grappling, but I don't think that you step in on short notice unless you feel something. You know what I mean? I think we saw a lot with guys like Sean O'Malley, with guys who, you know, really have some kind of juice behind them. And I really think that Payton Talbott can still be that kind of star in the UFC. And I think he does it in blistering fashion here. So I'm going to say Payton Talbott round 1 KO.
You know, I was going to say we should both say our prediction for this fight at the exact same time.
Yeah.
And I wish we had, because I was going to say the exact same time.
No, we should have.
I think this fight was a bit confusing to me because I agree I couldn't say that I recalled Felipe Lima's fights. He seems like he's had 2 fights from the UFC so far. The biggest question mark, like we said at the beginning, was that his last 2 fights have been at 145. That kind of throws a lot of questions there. I mean, rarely do you see a fighter go down a weight and perform at the same level that they've have. I mean, it's more draining. It's just generally harder. I do think it does make more sense for him to be at 135, though. I mean, he's 5'6". Let me look at. They have specific reach differences real quick. So they're relatively the same age. Payton Talbott 5'10", Lima 5'6". Reach isn't that different. Talbott has 70.5. Lima has 68. But yeah, I think it's weird, almost as if Payton Talbott's almost getting the Bo Nickel treatment in a way, where you have a guy who's treated as this indomitable force who is the next coming, essentially. And that's almost the way that Bo Nickel was treated. And even up until his fight against De Ridder, I believe he went in as a minus 200 favorite, a minus 300 favorite against De Ridder. But that fight obviously didn't go the way people were anticipating. But I think it's weird that the betting is going the way it has, just because I feel like if it was a move up to 145, then I would probably agree that it's going to be a bit more difficult, and going against a guy that is going in short notice against a guy who has been consistently fighting at 145, that would be difficult. But if this is at 135, I think Payton has the experience there. I think he's going to learn a lot from that loss. And I see a very esque return in the sense that you kind of go into the UFC and you're getting these really quick wins and these really dominant wins, essentially, where no one's really giving you any trouble and you're kind of on top of the world in a sense. And when you have that loss against a guy that you're not necessarily anticipating losing to, it kind of resets you and brings you back into reality. And I think Payton Talbott's going to have one of those where he's kind of jump back and realize that he needs to focus more and not treat himself. Not to say that Payton Talbott is like this like cocky dude who thinks that he's going to win every fight, or win like first round knockout every single fight, but kind of be able to reset and kind of reevaluate how you're going into fights, looking at fights. I think that's going to be a big factor, and I think he's definitely I think he's going to come in with a different mindset, and I'm going to agree. First round knockout of Payton Talbott. I'm actually very excited to see this fight because, like you said, but I think some other some stats that kind of stand out is the strikes per minute difference. Payton Talbott gets about 7 significant strikes per minute, whereas Lima only gets about 3.5. So I think there's going to be a lot of pressure. I think you're going to put Lima on his back foot, and I think that's where Talbott's going to succeed the most. So yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good card overall. I would just say if you're just looking at the main card, there's not really a single fight on here that's kind of like a filler fight. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
which is really, really good news for UFC fight fans, because it kind of, even if the fights don't quite live up like every single one, at least there's stakes. You know what I mean? Which I think is really important from cards like this. So yeah, can't wait for this one. You know, please continue to check us out. We're on YouTube. Drew's been putting out some awesome shorts and videos there. We're on all platforms you would need to listen on your podcast. So thanks for listening. We got some cool stuff coming out this week and next week as always. And we are out. Thank you.